Okay, so first we're going to talk about a healing wish. So the sentiment is a healing wish for you. This has always been really hard for me personally to, when I have a loved one or a friend who's going through a hard time, to be able to tell them what I really want to say. It never quite happens for me with words. I have to make it with my hands. And so if if I could paint it, if I could draw it, if I could sculpt it, then I feel like, okay, now I can really say what's in my heart because I can't put it into words. And so that's sort of the way I approach this piece. I thought about how can one visualize empathy? What does it look like to magically lift the pain from somebody who is hurting? What does it look like visually to be able to tell someone, to be able to communicate that you want to be there for them, you want to be supportive, you want to help them in some way. So that's kind of the way I approach this. I also thought of it as a gift. I mean, it has a function. It's a box. It opens and closes. But at the same time, even though it's functional, I wanted it to be to carry a very personal message. I wanted it to be very personal. Well, I thought about creating a narrative, telling a story, but telling a story that carries an emotion. Healing is a very individual process. We all heal differently. But for me, my experience is that nature heals. So I want to give you some examples. And some of the more recent pieces I've done, like Everyday Blessings, Starry Night Nativity, I've used a lot of icons or symbols from the natural world. The rain, the sun, the wind, birds. Many birds, yes. But here I really wanted, in this piece, I wanted to focus more on the seasonal cycles, the cycle of life, those little milestones, those little small wonders that happen that make us aware and make us alive and make us hopeful. And so I'm going to give you an example of throughout the year, just a few things. I mean, there's hundreds and they all overlap. And I know you have your own little small wonders, but that are comforting to me and help with healing. So starting with the spring, in the spring, the spring rains and the sound of the rain and the smell of the spring rains. And then spring peepers, those are the little frogs that hang out at all the little ponds that you hear. And when I hear them, that's really early in the spring. That to me is, okay, winter's over, spring is here. I guess moving into the summer, there's kind of that transition of warmth. So for example, in May, I always look for the gold coreopsis. And then in June, it's the coneflowers in pink. And that sort of overlaps with the blazing stars in July. And they always bloom on my son's birthday, which is July the 7th. So I await for that. That's comforting to see that yes, they are blooming again. Another thing I wanted to mention, I almost forgot about, were the bird songs that are familiar to us. And even if you don't know like what song goes with what bird, they're still familiar. I mean, the sound of a robin or a chickadee, it's like, oh yes, it's back. And then let's see, the fall. Oh my gosh, my favorite. The opening seed heads. I love to gather the milkweed pods and how they just sort of uncurl mathematically, all lined up, all the seeds. So just like a certain sort of order that they unroll and then suddenly explode into these little puffs. And then, of course, the silent migration of the monarchs coming through. And then, of course, the leaves changing. We all wait for that change. And then, of course, the winter, so many unexpected beauties with the ice and the snow, and that sort of slow melt into spring. And that's hopeful. That's hopeful. And for me, these little small wonders are really the manifestation of hope. And that is healing. That is healing. And so if you look at the piece, I did include the human form in there. It's kind of a gesture of giving and receiving, because it was important to me to show that we are a part of nature. We are a part of that the whole cycle of life, of regeneration and renewal. So it was important to very much integrate the figures into the plant and the animal forms. And I've done this sort of integration of the human form with the plant and animal forms on some of the other pieces. In particular, if you look at the Starry Night nativity on the front, it's kind of all the same stuff I'm talking about, but here I'm carrying it a little bit further. You know, that was a different technique. It was flatter and a different way of talking about it, but you can kind of now look at that and see, oh yeah, little bit of a narrative there. Same artist. Yeah.
Same artist. Yeah.
So I talked about making this a narrative, telling a story, but really these are just suggestions or maybe little clues. My real hope is that the real story of healing comes between the giver and the receiver, that they can come up with their own story about healing.